One of the themes of a spiritual practice is that of discipline. And I expect that many of you have experimented with discipline. Most people have experimented with it with varying results. And today I'd like to talk about what it is to practice the discipline of being free. How is it that we can hold ourselves, restrict ourselves to freedom? When we think about discipline, we often consider something specific that we usually refer to as self-discipline. So self-discipline is very good. Self-discipline is a wonderful quality that we should develop. It's like any other strength, any other skill. You can get better and better at it. You can actually have more of it the more you work at it. And that's very good. But self-discipline remains quite limited. And it's important for everyone to know that, it's important for all of us as we attempt to practice this path to acknowledge that self-discipline is inherently limited. That means that you only have so much of it. And any amount that you use for one thing, you cannot use for every other thing. Now you can, like a muscle or any other developmental quality, you can get more self-discipline with time. You can get better and better at being self-disciplined. But nonetheless, it remains limited. And if you're attempting to discipline yourself to do things that you don't want to do, then you'll come up against a wall. You'll come up against limitations as you go. So, Shinzen has a phrase which I really like about discipline. And that is, if you can't be disciplined, be clever. And it means that a lot of the time it isn't good enough to just try to make yourself do the things that you know you should do. On the contrary, you need to set things up so that it's easier to do what you want to do than to do what you don't want to do. Now, one of my favorite examples of this is something called the 20-second rule, which some of you may have heard of. And who's heard of that? Has anyone heard of that? Oh, no one knows about this? You know about this?
When you drop something?
What? Oh, when you drop something, I like it. 20 seconds is a long time.
That's 5 seconds.
I like it. That's good. Yeah, 20 second. Yeah, if you're at 20 seconds, you can easily count slowly, and you can be at a minute or as long as you want. You just leave your food on the floor rather than put it in the fridge. So, what?
So not that.
Yeah, I wasn't referring to that. But I appreciate that. So there's the sense is that if it takes more than 20 seconds to do something, you probably won't do it. All right, so if it takes more than 20 seconds to get going on something, you're just probably not going to do it at all. And the story about this is that there was an individual who was watching a lot of TV. He wanted to read more. He wanted to watch less TV, read more. And he tried for years all kinds of tricks in order to get to the point when he would stop watching TV when he got back from work and instead read a book, and none of it worked. And in the end, he just made one very simple adjustment, and that is that he put the remote control to the television in a box in the closet. And he put a book on the coffee table near where he walked into his apartment. And in the past, he would always get back and say, I'd really like to read a book, but I'm just so tired. I think I'm just going to sit here and watch TV for a little while. Instead of that, he would think, I really want to watch TV, but I'm so tired, I think I'll just read a book for a while. because walking all the way to the closet, opening it, opening the box, getting the remote control, closing the box, closing the closet, walking back to the couch was just too much work. It was too difficult for him to do all that, and so he just read a book. It's so much easier. And he noticed that that kind of thing worked better. That kind of cleverness worked better than constantly trying to beat ourselves into submission. In my case, I have a story that is one of my favorite stories about learning about myself, even though usually people don't like this story much. So sorry, this will be anticlimactic after that one. But for a lot of my life, I chewed my nails. Did you know this? This is my mother, everyone. Thank you. Appreciate your hard work.
I don't want to seem like an inattentive mother.
Oh, but you didn't notice that? Yeah. Yeah, so I did it, and I tried to stop doing it, but I couldn't stop doing it, and I kept on trying to stop doing it. It wasn't a big deal, and you may not have noticed it because of, well, we'll get to that at the end. But I was chewing my nails, and it was an issue, and it hurts. I don't know if any of you do this, but sometimes it hurts. It goes down too low, and then it's hard to do things. It's awful. And so one time I was in China, and I didn't have much to do that day, and I was walking down the street, and I found for, I believe, 1 yuan, maybe 1 yuan or something like that, maybe less than a yuan, I found these little cheap nail clippers. And I don't know why I bought them. I don't know why I did it, but I just bought them. And immediately stopped chewing my nails and haven't done it since. And I realized the reason that I chewed my nails. Can any of you guess? They just needed clipping, and I didn't have any other way to do it. I didn't have nail clippers. And so it just didn't occur to me, that simple thing didn't occur to me. Why don't I buy some nail clippers? Just didn't show up in my mind. And so my nails would get long, and I'd want to chew them. And it didn't occur to me that I didn't actually want to chew them. I just wanted them to go away. So this, to me, was revolutionary. It was a revelation that had a revolutionary impact on my way of dealing with my own patterns. Other time I realized it isn't a matter of self-discipline. It isn't a matter of getting mad at myself for doing something that I don't want to do. On the contrary, it's a matter of enabling myself to do what I do want to do. And so, how do we do that in terms of a spiritual practice? Well, the first thing I'd say is that while I'm a big fan of discipline and not a big fan of self-discipline, I believe that we need community. I know for myself, for the vast majority of my time in practice of meditating, that I did not have the self-discipline needed in order to do meditation at all. Not at all. And I, unlike a lot of you, you're an unusual population of people who, most of you probably like meditating. I'm not a member of your happy tribe. I, for years, for thousands of hours of practice, years of practice, including monastic practice, more or less completely hated meditation. Meditation is very hard for me. I'm not good at it. I don't have any natural concentration, clarity, or equanimity. It was all hard work, and most of that hard work didn't go well. It was suffering, it was tension, it was anger, it was sadness, it was fear, and it was, as we say, that icky, sticky, creepy, crawly, I can't stand it, but it doesn't hurt feeling. It was just awful, and I just had to get through it, and I knew that I couldn't do that, that there was no way I was going to get myself to sit down. Furthermore, getting up was worse, and I would anticipate that. So I'd sit down, it would be terrible, and then I'd get up and I'd look around, and life looked much worse than it did before I sat down. I was angry at the world. I was more aware that I didn't know how to live my life, and more aware that no one seems to know how to live our lives, that human beings are a mess, and there really isn't hope. So that was my experience of the practice for many, many years. And so just so you know, if you have any difficulty in the practice, you can feel free to tell me about it. I'm there with you. So what did I do? I knew I couldn't meditate, and I knew that I needed to meditate, but I knew I couldn't. So what do you do when you can't do something you must do? Oh, yeah, you get help. Exactly. You get someone else to make you do it. And so I got as my mother well knows, a one-way ticket to Japan. And I entered a monastery. And I entered a strict monastery where, you're going to meditate. There's no what if something. As I've told you many times, again, one of my favorite stories, I was being taught how to eat. And you put bowls in front of you when you eat in a Japanese Zen monastery in a certain order. And they were telling me you put rice in the big bowl, and then you put soup in the next bowl. And I, being an innocent, teenage, self-righteous American, interrupted and asked, well, what if I don't want rice? And there was just no answer to that. He just looked at me and just kept going. That's an incomprehensible question. Not even that rice is so good that you'd, of course, want it. It's that no one cares what you want. Eat the rice. No one cares. What you eat isn't up to you around here. We don't care. Put rice in the big bowl, soup in the middle bowl, and the side dish in the next bowl. There are these pickles that you're going to use to clean your bowls. Now we're going to move on to the next thing. And I needed that. I needed people who really didn't care what I wanted. I needed people who were more interested in whether I did what needed to be done than whether I did what I wanted to do. And I was very grateful for that. And so, for years, I meditated an average of 8 hours a day. If I had been on my own, I would have meditated an average of 0 hours a day. And that's a big difference. 0 to 8 hours a day is a significant difference. And that's on average. Some days it was much more than 8 hours. And in that entire process, I used absolutely no self-discipline. None. That was great. It didn't take any work on my part. The times when I was late, I completely offloaded, outsourced the discipline to other people who would conveniently come and yell at me. It was so helpful. It was really a sacrifice on their part. The people don't like yelling at other people, but they were willing to yell at me for my benefit. And I, at the moment, of course, didn't like it, but overall, I was obviously grateful, or else I wouldn't have stayed. So that was very helpful. And we have the opportunity to set up for ourselves a community that can hold us to account, that can get us to do the things that we should do that we don't want to do. And a big one that deserves more attention than it will get today is that of personal growth. A lot of the time we don't want to change how we see things. We don't want to change how we do things. But good news, there are people who get annoyed at us. Isn't it great? And who tell us how we should change. It's so nice of them. Of course, they don't enjoy it. If you look at their face while they're doing it, they're not happy. But they're willing to do it for our benefit. So if we're in a situation where people don't like us, then it's very convenient for us. And so that's something I would say to actually seek out. Really seek out being with people who don't like you much and who wish that you would change, because it'll be easier to change in that way. So, of course, again, you should be grateful for it, because if you disagree with someone and they get mad at you and you change, then you're the one who's benefited, right? You know, because they didn't take advantage of their opportunity for personal growth, right? So that's sort of hard on them. So it's important to feel and express gratitude. For most of us, these are our close families, the people who we live with, and oftentimes they are really annoyed with us and we're really annoyed with them. But that is the opportunity to change. And I can tell you that in my experience, those times when someone has asked me to change, and I have, it has benefited me far more than it's benefited them. They asked me to change, and as I've often said, the deal that we implicitly make is, tell you what, you change and I'll be happy. If you change, I'll be happy. All you have to do is change, and then I'll be happy. Okay, so how about that? Is it a deal? We can make a deal, right? If you change, you do the changing part, and I'll do the happy part, and we're even. And so I've taken people up on that deal, right? I said, okay, I mean, I want you to be happy, so I'll change. And I did my part. I changed. I grew. I shifted. Yes? So I did my part. Many times I've actually done my part on that deal. No one has ever done their part, has completed their side of the deal. No one has ever been happy because I changed. The issue was never that I was a certain way, and therefore they were sad, unhappy, frustrated. The issue was always that they had their own issue and were offloading it on me. But good news, I grew. And that benefited me for the rest of my life. Didn't benefit them at all. Yes? They were not happy. So it's a really wonderful arrangement that you can set up with your loved ones. That they'll complain about you and ask you to grow. You will do it. They'll receive no benefit, and you'll receive benefit for the rest of your life. It's something to be grateful for, something to really thank people for when they're irritated with you. So that's the kind of discipline that is most often imposed on us in our regular lives. People wish we would be different and can assist us in changing in those ways. They're willing to do it despite the fact that clearly they receive very little good in return. That's very kind. However, that alone, people chastising us, isn't the whole picture, because that is still something that's coming from the outside. It's still people on the outside attempting to push us into something. There has to be an inward joy to the process as well. So something that I like to say is, and if any of you can prove this wrong, I'd be very grateful. I've asked many people many times to demonstrate how this is an incorrect statement. So good luck. I'd love it. But as far as I can tell, people only do things for two reasons. You'll only do things for two reasons. Now, if you want to include enlightened people, then you can add that some people do things for no reason. But that's no reason, so it's not a reason. So people only do things for two reasons. One, we want to, and two, we're in the habit. I don't know of any other reason that people do anything, but maybe you can think up one. When these two come into conflict, it's almost always the case, except in the case of extreme desire, that habit wins. Habit is generally much stronger than desire. We can want to do something, we're in the habit of doing something else, we'll do the thing we're accustomed to, we'll do the thing we're familiar with. That's reasonable, but good news, if you keep up the desire and you implement cleverness, then often you can change the patterns. And once you've changed the patterns, then again, without much effort, you'll keep on doing that thing. People often say practice makes perfect, but I don't agree with that. You can practice something bad, and then practice makes bad. What practice does is create patterns. Practice makes patterns. And those patterns function on their own. Those patterns just keep moving. They just keep on doing their thing. And with relatively little effort, you can keep on doing that thing. So if you set up a good pattern, then without much effort, you keep on doing a good thing. The way that you can structure those patterns is with your desires, with your intentions. You want things to change, and you can. But the question is, do you want things to change? That's a good question. And one thing that I've noticed when it comes to discipline is that a lot of people will claim, I'm not disciplined. People will say that, but it's not true. It's objectively, demonstrably untrue. We're all disciplined. We're all equally disciplined, which is we're 100% disciplined. Everyone is always perfectly disciplined. The question isn't, are we disciplined? The question is, what is our discipline? So let's say that you claim to be undisciplined. In most cases when someone says that, what they mean is, I just do what I want to do. I'm not disciplined. I do what I want to do. I wish I would do this thing, but I don't. But in the moment I don't want to do it. I want to do this other thing, and I just do that thing. But what isn't seen then is that our discipline is then, I do what I want. I'm totally committed to doing what I want when I want to do it. Which is to say, I hold myself to the standard of being mastered, of serving selfish desires. I will hold myself to that. When a selfish desire tells me to do something, I will do it. No matter what, without questioning it, without struggle, I will just do that thing that I want to do. In that case, that's actually extraordinary discipline, isn't it? We're very disciplined. We have a master who has mastered us totally, and we serve that master in the most disciplined way. We'll just do whatever that master says without any question, even if the thing will hurt us, right? Now that's a lot of discipline, isn't it? Sometimes the desire tells you to do something that will hurt you, and you'll do it anyway. That's a lot of discipline, isn't it? That's amazing. Yes? So, what do we do if we're disciplined by that discipline? The discipline of doing what we want. The discipline of feeling a desire arise and immediately, without question, without struggle, doing exactly what it says. Yes, it's an amazing thing, isn't it? A very streamlined discipline. What do we do about that? How do we master that master if that master has mastered us? And as far as I can tell, the way you do it is you change what you perceive as pleasurable, which you can do. You can change what you perceive as pleasurable. That can be done. You can carefully create a certain kind of pleasure in a certain way that you will then want. And then you'll follow that pleasure because your discipline is to do whatever you want. You go after that pleasure. And an example of this, of course, is in the meditation practice. As you're practicing, you may have the desire to think about this. You may have the desire to get up and stop. One thing you can do, of course, is just have people around who will yell at you if you get up, and have a teacher around who will yell at you if you're distracted. So that's good. That's what I did. But after a while, I realized an even more powerful strategy, and one that doesn't cause as much trouble for other people. And that is that in the moment of wanting to do something, in the moment of being drawn to something unwholesome, something unhealthy, something damaging, a thought or an action or whatever it is, in that moment of being drawn in a certain way, I could not do it. And I just experiment. What happens if I don't do it? And what happens if I practice being okay with this desire pressing on me and I don't move? What would happen? And I just try it with little desires, just tiny desires, little things. It doesn't have to be a big thing. But a little thing, I'd notice that in that moment of not doing the thing that my master was telling me to do, I experienced freedom. I experienced freedom. And that was very pleasurable. Very pleasurable. And I actually wanted the freedom in certain cases, certain rare cases. It wasn't much at first, but I wanted the freedom more than I wanted the pleasure from that desire. And once that happened, then I could just do whatever I wanted, which was not do what I wanted. Really. And then there's an experience of freedom. There's a pleasure that comes with it, and I could follow out that pleasure. Some of you know Peace Pilgrim, and she has a wonderful line, which you actually can hear in some of her recordings, but it's in her book as well. She said that when she was younger, her friends got into smoking and alcohol, and she didn't, and they were pressuring her to smoke and drink. This resonated for me because I have never done those things. And as you can imagine, that's hard for some people to accept, that someone else wouldn't do those things. So I was very rapt in reading this part of her book and listening to this in her lectures. And she said, finally, I had to have a talk with my friends. So I sat them down and I told them, we all can make our own choices in life. And I have chosen freedom. Yes. So she chose freedom in that way. And rather than serving that certain kind of, quote, pleasure, she chose freedom from it. That was what she wanted. She was attracted to that freedom. It wasn't self-discipline. She was doing what she wanted. A good example of this is that I, and actually all of us at the Monastic Academy, follow a vegan diet. And when it comes to to not eating meat, to not eating animal products, I personally have absolutely no self-discipline whatsoever. I don't have any self-discipline. Which is to say, I eat meat whenever I want to. 100% of the time that I want to eat it, I eat it. Yes? Which is why I never eat it, because it's disgusting. I have no interest in it. None. I see it. I go to restaurants and I look at the menu and I look at the menu and I see, oh, I forgot that some people think meat is food. Right? I was just shocked by it. Because it doesn't seem that way to me. For her, it wasn't that she wished she could, and people don't understand this. People think, oh, maybe I have a way of helping this poor person to eat what he really wants. There's no interest in that. The same way that you could go to a Peace Pilgrim and say, hey, don't worry, no one will see, here's a cigarette. She didn't want it. So in that case, what she wanted had been structured in such a way as to lead to her freedom. As we do this practice, we start to directly notice the pleasure of freedom. And in particular, the pleasure of freedom from our personal self-centered desires. There's an actual pleasure in it. There's something exciting about it. There's something peaceful in it. There's something fulfilling in it. And once we start to taste that, we want it more. We want it more. Thanissaro Bhikkhu is a monk who I very much appreciate. And he says, a lot of Buddhist teachers tell modern people that they want too much. Say, you all want too much. This is about getting past desire. But he says, I don't agree with that. I think the problem is people don't want enough. People are satisfied with too little. I mean, look at everybody. We're not happy. how can you be satisfied with that? You should find real happiness. You should want more, not less. In the same way, rather than saying, this is what I want, but I'm going to force myself to not get it, instead of that, you carefully set things up so that you want something wholesome. And you start to notice that the wholesome things, in particular freedom, that is more satisfying, more fulfilling, more exciting, more joyful than getting what we want. And you can take this to a certain point, which many of us here have, in which you, not out of a self-punishment, but just because you want to, you put yourself in uncomfortable situations that you want to get out of. You fast, or you put yourself in very painful physical positions, or you put yourself into, you put yourself outside for several days. You stay for 3 months at the top of Mount Mansfield. This is what I did in the winter. And you put yourself in these situations which you may not enjoy, but that you do it anyway is more fulfilling than doing what you enjoy. And so these ascetic practices provide people with enormous pleasure, enormous happiness. Not because you force yourself into it, because you've been drawn by a deeper pleasure. And so as we spiritually practice the way of equanimity, the way of freedom from clinging, from rejecting, from fighting, from holding on, as we practice that form of freedom, we gradually taste a kind of pleasure that frees us from the unhealthy patterns that cause difficulties for us and ultimately difficulty for the world. And the reason that I wanted to dedicate all this half an hour to this single topic is that, as far as I can tell, the single most dangerous form of slavery, the single most dangerous phenomenon on this planet right now, is the human addiction to doing what we want to do. There's nothing more dangerous to life on this planet and to the future of human civilization than people successfully getting and doing what they want. It's the most problematic phenomenon on the planet right now. It may not be in the future, things may change. Naturally, terminal war is also a terrifying possibility. And I would say that that's mostly around hate as opposed to want. But given the horrifying destruction of nature, the accelerating killing of living beings that has been continuing and, as I say, accelerating for thousands of years, given that we have such clear evidence for the dangers of human beings getting and doing what we want, I'd say that it's essential for us to become more skillful in getting and doing what we want, so that what we want, even if we haven't transcended what we want, nonetheless, even if we're doing what we want is good. And there's a very clear way that this is achieved. This is how we save the world. This is how it's done. This is how we give birth to the mind that will save the world. You sit down and you want to do something and you don't do it. And notice how it is that at that moment there's a kind of joy. There's a certain kind that you have to experience and get to know and cultivate and get good at in order to let it fill you. And as it fills you, you're providing the world with what the world needs most. Again, you attend, you notice that you want to do something. You don't do it. But you don't do it in order to experience the happiness that comes from the freedom from being totally controlled by desire. There's an experience of freedom. And then you discipline yourself to experience that freedom, to experience what you most want. And that's discipline. Get what you most want. So, we can now practice this, and in so doing, save the world. Take a moment to structure your posture so that your body is simultaneously upright, tall, extended, alert, and also calm, placid, and relaxed. And bring your attention to your breathing. Pay attention to the in-breath and the out-breath. Experience breathing in while you're breathing in. Experience breathing out while you're breathing out. Continue to attend to your breathing, experiencing the in-breath during the in-breath, experiencing the out-breath during the out-breath. And while you breathe, notice if you're drawn to thinking. Notice if you want to think about something. Notice if a thought emerges that attracts your attention, so that you have the desire to engage in that thought. If this doesn't happen, then fine. Continue to attend to the in-breath and the out-breath. That's good. That allows you to deepen your concentration. But if thoughts emerge that you want to engage in, then experiment with returning to the breath in order to not serve, be controlled by desire, in order to experience freedom from slavery to desire. If a desire to think about something comes up, don't think about it just in order to see if there's any enjoyment in demonstrating that you're not utterly controlled by desire. Mysteriously, if there is such enjoyment, such fulfillment, such satisfaction, you can enjoy that, so that whatever remaining desire there is receives what it wants, happiness and fulfillment. So you gain what you want by not doing what you want. Once again, if no thoughts come up, if you're not interested in thinking anything in particular, very good. Continue to experience inhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale. If thoughts come up that distract you, which is to say, pull on your attention, if you want to engage in those thoughts, practice not engaging, but instead returning to the breath. But do so in order to see if there's any pleasure in that experience, that demonstration of freedom. It may be subtle. It's a refined taste. So pay close attention. Is there any pleasure just in being free from serving desire? In a moment, I'll ring the bell, and for a few minutes, 3 or 4 minutes, you'll have the opportunity to move around. You can move around in whatever way you'd like. Walk around inside, you can go outside for a moment, use the restrooms, get some water. But however you move in harmony with your breath. Move in concert with your breath. And anytime that you want to move in a different way, experiment with setting that aside, not following that desire, and experiencing the pleasure of being free from that desire, so that that pleasure becomes an even more appealing desire. So perhaps you're walking, and each step would be with an inhale or an exhale. And when you want to change that rhythm, experiment with not changing that rhythm and seeing what happens if you don't follow that want. Is there a kind of pleasure, a kind of freedom in that? And after a few minutes, I'll ring the bell again and we'll return to our seats and continue a practice in stillness. Continue to explore your breath. Experiencing the inhale as you inhale, the exhale as you exhale. And as you pay attention to your breath, notice if any other body sensations call your attention. Is there anything else that you're feeling that you want to engage, that you want to pay attention to? If so, experiment with not paying attention to that. See if there's any pleasure that comes from not following that desire, but instead returning to your breath. In particular, pay attention to any desire to do something, any desire in your body to move in any way. Naturally, if that doesn't arise, very good, continue with attending to your breath. But if there is any desire to move in any way, or any body sensation other than breathing that you want to pay attention to, experiment with not engaging that, not paying attention to that, not following that, not being controlled by that, but instead returning to your breath and being free of that. And notice if there's any pleasure in that freedom. Very good. We have experimented with not engaging the desire to think, being free from the desire to think, not engaging the desire to feel, being free from the desire to feel, not engaging the desire to move, being free from the desire to move. And we've explored the possibility that there may be a kind of pleasure in that freedom. Perhaps even a pleasure greater than serving, giving in to, capitulating to that desire. If you'd like, continue with this, but if you'd like, now attend to any desire you may have to pay attention to the world around you. Pay attention to the people around you, to the room. In fact, to pay attention to the world that you live in. Naturally, if that desire doesn't arise, very good, stay with your breath. But if the desire to pay attention to the surrounding environment does arise, experiment with not engaging, not paying attention to that, but instead returning to your breath and see if there's a pleasure in that freedom, a pleasure and freedom from the world. And that way you can experiment with pleasure from your mind, pleasure from your body, pleasure from the world, that comes from freedom from your mind, freedom from your body, freedom from the world. if you'd like, you can turn your attention back to what you think, feel, and observe. But it's not required. This is a time for questions, comments, sharing of any type. Now, time is yours. Sierra?
So I experienced that during the thinking, I would often think about what I was going to do in the future or
Mm-hmm.
future things, and it was kind of a little bit stressful, just like those thoughts. So like bringing my attention to my breathing, by doing that, it actually really did feel good, joyous, and liberating.
Mm-hmm.
It felt a lot better than I expected.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but I'm wondering during the day if, like it's simple just to bring our attention to the breathing, but during the day, I'm wondering if there's a better focus point to bring attention to than the breath, or if you recommend always, instead of what we naturally are inclined to like think about or be doing.
Mm-hmm. Good. Well, as Shinzen often says, if you're in the role of teacher, one of the important things to do is to listen to the questions. And your job in listening to the questions is to hear what the question is, or sometimes what the questions are. Because sometimes a lot of questions are put into one question. So I'm hearing a few different questions, actually. The first is about this pleasure. What sort of pleasure are we talking about here anyway? And I'd like to go into that just a bit. The next is how can we experience that pleasure during the day? And then the final one is what's the most effective focus space regardless of pleasure in terms of getting stuff done. So we'll see if you tell me as I try to go through these if that's resonating, if that's what, I mean, you're nodding, those of you who aren't seeing, so maybe this is what is happening for you, but I'll go through those. So the first one is what is this pleasure anyway? I heard you talk about a certain kind of pleasure, and that was the pleasure of noticing that it's more enjoyable to pay attention to your breathing than to pay attention to stressful thoughts. Now that is an extremely important insight and brings up a huge issue for us people, us human beings, us living things. We living things have a real issue here in that when it comes to what is pleasurable, we're often wrong. Which may seem strange. How could one be wrong about that? We should know, shouldn't we? If there's anything you should be able to know, is it enjoyable to do something? It seems like it's totally subjective and your opinion must be the truth. It's about, are you happy? Yes? But people are actually often wrong about the answer to the question, are you happy? Are you experiencing pleasure? And you just described a case in which that seems to be the case. An instance of that phenomenon. And that you're thinking about these thoughts about the future, and you were surprised at, on the one hand, how unenjoyable it is to have those thoughts, because it seems like we want to have those thoughts. Why else would we be having them? Nobody's forcing us to think about it. We're choosing of our own free will as we sit to think those thoughts. Why would we do that if they weren't deeply pleasurable? Yes? Here we are. You get to think about any number of things, or you get to not think. It seems that you would choose the thing that makes you happiest. And yet, strangely, we don't. Why? Not because we want to be sad, not because we want to be stressed, but because we're just wrong about what happiness feels like and what stress feels like. It's amazing. Especially for us in our culture, where we really believe that we are the experts. Yes? I've talked a little bit, maybe not enough, not as much as I've wanted, but I've talked a little bit about this thing, this religion, that most of us subscribe to called humanism, and in particular liberal humanism. And liberal humanism means that the individual's desires are the best guide to what will be of benefit. Okay? And that's the religion that we subscribe to now. It's a religion just like any other. Yes? There's something in which we have blind faith. Yes? Just like God. Just like some religions have God. We have utter blind faith in human experience. I think our experience is God. It's the thing to be worshipped, followed blindly. In that system, we have a phrase that we really like. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Right? It's something that we really believe. It's why we can put a toilet in a museum and call it art. Yes? Anything's art if beauty's in the eye of the beholder. If you think it's art, it's art. End of story. It's not like other cultures where you have to learn what beauty is. That's a lot of life. Getting to the point when you can see what beauty is. It's not up to you. You have to mature to the point of understanding it. For us, it seems especially confusing if I am not the authority, apparently. I don't know. I can be ignorant regarding what I think is beautiful. Yes? I can be ignorant regarding what I feel is good. I may not know that. So I may want to pay attention to a certain thought because I believe that it will be of benefit. Yes? And then when we actually do it and we examine it, we mature and we realize I was wrong. This thought is much more painful than I thought it was, than I had previously believed. Now that is a very important insight. Okay? But it actually isn't, although I appreciate you bring it up, really good that you bring it up, it isn't the insight that I was referring to. But I'm very glad you bring it up. It's one that I care about deeply. That's why I just spent all the time on it, 10 minutes or so on it. But the insight that I was referring to actually wasn't that. It's good that you brought it up. Thank you for bringing it up. Bring it up as much as you'd like. But the thing I was talking about was actually the insight of noticing that regardless of what the desire is, regardless of what you want to pay attention to, just to not follow that desire is pleasurable. Simply because it's a demonstration that you're not enslaved, not controlled, not mastered by that desire. And that freedom is what's enjoyable. So what you're noticing is, I wanted to think about this particular thing, but the particular thing didn't turn out to be as enjoyable as I thought. What I'm saying is, let's say that you want to pay attention to this particular thing, and it was as enjoyable as you thought. Maybe it was even more enjoyable, but you still turn your attention away from it. Not because of how enjoyable it is, but simply in order to turn away from, not follow that desire. There's a pleasure there also. So you actually now have two reasons to not attend to those stressful thoughts. One, because you don't want to, because they're not that good. And two, because you want to. And that's not that good. You see? So that's the first point I wanted to clarify. The second is, okay, so here's this pleasure. Maybe now we have two forms of pleasure. How do I access that during the day? And in terms of that, it actually doesn't really matter what your focus space is, what your technique is. Doesn't make much of a difference, because whatever you choose, you can still access these two kinds of pleasure. Now, as you go through the day, you may notice that at a certain time, thinking about those things actually is pleasurable. You may notice that, okay? Now, at that time, you have only one reason to not pay attention to it. Yes? Because you want to. But now you want to. It's not that you don't want to, okay? And so that's a reason to pay attention to it, and you may want to follow that. At a time like this, the thing to notice is that there's a third kind of pleasure. Sorry it's so complicated. So many kinds of happiness. Maybe should we cut down? Not have so much happiness? No, we'll have a third kind. So the third kind of happiness is the happiness of compassion, happiness of living a life of service. And in that way, we realize that, well, why do we think? And the reason is we think because we need to. That's why. It's as simple as that. We think because we need to in order to be of service. And in fact, thinking can be very helpful in being of service. And the pleasure of compassion is very pleasurable. And so that can draw us into thinking. We're not getting a lot of pleasure from the thoughts themselves, but we're getting pleasure out of knowing that we're thinking in order to benefit the world. And that commitment to love is deeply fulfilling. The willingness to be mastered by love is much more fulfilling than the willingness to be mastered by selfish desire. So good news, you can do that. And in doing that, you can change your focus space so that you're actually attending to the thoughts, and you're trying to have better thoughts that will benefit the world more, so that that knowledge, those thoughts, will fill you with even more happiness. Okay, so we've gone through two of the questions. Does it all make sense so far? And then the final one is, what will be of the most benefit? Yes? And what's the technique that will benefit the world most? And in that way, I would suggest that if we've taken the step of compassion, okay, then you should review, you go back to the technique we just went through. There's such a thing as attending to thoughts. There's such a thing as attending to body. So attending to mind, attending to body, and attending to the world. Okay? Those are the three places where things happen, as I like to say. You know? So sometimes I go into school classrooms, and I'll actually ask them, and if the children are young enough, they can get the answer correct. High school gets hard, but up through 7th grade, it's pretty easy to get this answer. I say, where do things happen? There are three places. What are they? Yes, and they usually can get it, mind, body, and world. That's where things happen. Those are the three places where things happen. So those places are places that we just worked with, right? Turning your attention away from those places, away from mind, away from body, away from world. But if your interest is in compassion, then you can intentionally attend to mind, body, and world, because that's where the wisdom is to tell you how to live to be of benefit. Yes? In your mind, you think things through. You analyze cause and effect. What do I want to affect? Right? your body has the sense of compassion, sense of intuition, and the sense of desire to do, right? And then the world is telling you all kinds of stuff. As I said earlier, people will tell you, hey, stop being that way, right? There's something that has to be done. You can see it, and then your body may feel drawn to do it, and then your mind can think about what the best way is. So under those circumstances, the technique is various. It changes. But you can make use of all of those realms. You can adjust your technique moment by moment in order to match the place where it seems that wisdom is coming from, whether that's internally your conscience or externally other people's requests or the requests of situations. And in that way, as long as there isn't the compulsion to follow selfish desires, then all of that information is wisdom. Does that answer the full scope of the question, or has anything been missed?
Yeah, that was a good answer.
Okay. It was 20 minutes, so it's a good question. Mm-hmm.
Let's presume for a moment that I've mastered what we've been taught here, and that I enjoy freedom so much that I don't do anything non-productive, and that everything I do is for the benefit of myself, my family, and all of humanity.
All living things, or just all humanity?
Yeah, let's be humble.
Humble, only the human beings. Okay, very good.
But I mean, working exactly from this practice of I'm finding greater freedom from finding freedom from desire to be more freeing. However, whether it's 2 things or 20 things that I know need to be done, that I need to do, that will further benefit myself, my family, the world, but I just need a approach to get them done, or find space to do them. I mean, whereas the way you initially put it is how to not do bad things. How do you apply similarly the inverse to compel yourself to proactively do good things?
Yeah, that's a great question. Now, again, I wonder if there are 2 questions. I think in this case there may not be, and I'm just unclear about which of these 2 questions you're asking. One would be, how do you internally, in terms of this mindfulness practice, make use of the pleasure that we've been discussing in order to motivate yourself to take action? The other is, how do you figure out which of these things to do, how to do them in the most productive way? How do you determine which things will be of the most benefit? How do you prioritize? It's just the first one. Okay, that's good. Because I don't think I have any better answer for the second one than you do. Okay, that's not...
I trust myself.
Exactly.
I trust myself to answer the second
Excellent.
one the way I want to do it.
Excellent, very good. Yeah, I would trust you to choose that for yourself more than I would trust my advice. So I'm glad that you feel the same way. Okay, good. So once again, to reiterate, we're doing this practice. We have the ability to experience freedom from desire, and that's pleasurable for us. Yes? The question is that, so then we naturally, as you said, may have the desire to do something bad, but we now can apply the technique, not do that bad thing, and still experience pleasure. We're getting what we want. However, there are these good things for us to do. We'd like to do them, but how do we use the pleasure to motivate ourselves to do that? Correct? Okay, great. So 2 things. One, which I get to now repeat, which I like to do, compassion. Compassion is another kind of pleasure. And the magic of compassion is that it adds pleasure, it adds happiness, love, the experience of honoring the precious nature of our relationships with all beings, or maybe only all humans. That kind of pleasure is in absolutely no way in conflict with freedom from selfish desires. It's incredible. it's magic. It's utter magic. It's something that we explored for quite a while. Tony asked a question about this a few months ago, I suppose, where he said, if I feel that compassion is good for me, it makes me happy, so isn't compassion still selfish? Right? And I ended up getting the opportunity eventually, after pressing the question a few times, I got the opportunity to answer that question directly. There's no. There's such a thing. There is such a thing as compassion that is not selfish. It exists. There's also various forms of compassion that are in fact selfish. You're helping someone so that you can feel better than them. Right? That exists. Okay, we know it exists, but there's also a kind of compassion that isn't that. And so you get the best of both worlds. Okay? So the first answer is simple compassion. All right? Does that make sense so far?
Compassion being a motivator to kick me in the butt in the way that finding freedom from not smoking a cigarette, for example, kicks me in the butt to change that habit.
Exactly. Okay? So there's such a thing as compassion, and it will just add to, it'll work in concert with the other technique that we were using. All right? Now that's something that can be cultivated. It's something that we can learn to experience more and more. The other point is more subtle. But you've been doing this practice for a while, so we're going to go there. All right? The compassion point is convenient because it's as subtle as you want it to be. Right? You can understand compassion in a very shallow way, and it's fantastic. And then 20 years later, you understand it in a much deeper way, and it's more fantastic. This one, however, is maybe not fantastic at first. It's subtle. But it is that when the thoughts that you want to think are dissociated from, are robbed of, are purified of the desire to think them, they don't go away. They keep functioning. They just keep functioning. The only difference is when the desire to think them is gone, there's no one to either cling to them or resist them. If there's no one to cling to them, then there's the experience of happiness, of freedom from desire. If there's no one to resist them, then they automatically, without effort, produce action. It's just not selfish. And that action turns out in a way that you cannot understand, turns out to be of benefit to the world.
I get that. I guess I was maybe looking for a more convenient if then else, if desire can be overwhelmed by freedom to do, to not do something. And what's the converse for that, or the incentive, the thought process to do something good instead of not do something bad?
It's a great question. So I'll reiterate.
I get the compassion answer. You're right. The second part was.
Well, I'll say it in a different way. You're alive. You have energy. But your nature is not selfish. And if you simply don't interfere with your own nature, then that life, that activity, will, for no reason you can understand, joyously serve the world. The sense that we have to make ourselves, that we have to compel ourselves to do good, is based on an underlying assumption that we're bad. But what if we're not? Then the only thing we're in a position to do is rejoice. And there's no reason then to do good, except that it's our nature. It's just how we are. We can't help it unless we help it. Or we can't stop it unless we stop it. The only thing we can do is prevent ourselves from fulfilling our purpose, our nature. We can't create it. We can't make ourselves do it because it's our nature. The only thing that happens when you manipulate is you warp the natural flow of your heart. There's no way to make yourself do good, because doing good is what you do naturally. The only thing you can do is resist that. And if you stop resisting it, then the question of how do I make myself do good things utterly vanishes. It turns out to be based on false premises. Now, that is very hard to realize. It in fact is. And so it's of the utmost importance that we have the first answer. It's of the utmost importance that we have the first answer. Because the second answer is, on the one hand, hard to realize at all, and on the other hand, very easy to subtly manipulate and turn into, well, I just do what I want and that's wisdom. So it's very important that we have the first answer of compassion to align us, hold us to account. And in particular, for that reason, that we have relationships, that we have community, that we have people who can see us from the outside, and that we're willing to do the same, so that we're all helping each other to be more and more honest. And then in the end, it turns out that honesty and kindness are the same thing.
That's quite a bit for me.
Oh, whew. Whew.
Can you repeat the last sentence?
I don't remember it. I'm sorry. I have no idea what I just said.
Honesty and kindness.
It was beautiful.
Honesty and kindness are the same thing.
That's great.